Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Verbal to Visual podcast. I'm your host, Doug Neal, and on this show, I share with you one-on-one coaching calls about sketchnoting. You get to hear from folks in all different industries, all different sketchnoting skill levels, to talk through what they're up to with their sketchnoting work and how I might be able to help them continue moving forward with that work. And since we just reached double-digit episodes here with number 10, I wanted to put out a little request. If you have been enjoying this show and you've been learning from the conversations that we've been having, I would love for you to leave a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. By leaving that rating and typing out a real quick review, that will help other listeners, other folks who might be interested in sketchnoting and visual thinking. It'll help them find this show so that they too can benefit from listening to these conversations. So it would mean a lot to me if you pause this show, hop over and do that quick rating and review, and then jump back in here. In today's conversation, you're going to get to hear Krissa Randolph and I talk about teaching digital civics with Sketchnotes. Krissa is relatively early on in her sketchnoting journey, and much of what we talk through in today's conversation is an activity that I include at the beginning of the course, an introduction to visual note-taking. An activity that encourages you to identify the goal connected to you building your sketchnoting skills, the context in which you work, where you'll be using those skills, and the ultimate outcome that you hope to achieve with your sketchnoting work. I think it's helpful to set those clear goals and intentions before jumping into learning a new skill like sketchnoting. So I hope it's helpful for you to think through or rethink through those questions as you hear us talk about teaching civics and also digital literacy in an online format. And since online education is something that many of us are working with right now, I think you'll get a lot out of this conversation. You can find the show notes for today's episode at verbaltovisual.com/10, where you will also find a video version of this podcast. For the last couple of episodes, I've been recording my iPad screen while creating a really rough mind map of the conversation as it takes place. And I've been sharing that video along with the audio of our conversation on a new YouTube channel called the Verbal to Visual Podcast. So that's what I share on the show notes page in case you would like to have a bit of a visual reference throughout our conversation. And again, you can find that at verbaltovisual.com/10. Let's get into the conversation. All right, welcome, Krissa. Thanks for chatting with us today. To kick off our conversation, I will throw it to you to let you introduce yourself, let folks listening know where you're coming from, what you're up to, and where you are with your sketchnoting work right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Doug. It's good to be here. My name is Krissa Randolph. I am. My background is in history. That's what I studied in school. But then I sort of backed into a career in online education, starting with tutoring and then eventually working up to being a program developer and a project manager of digital education delivery. So I was, I guess, immediately attracted to, Doug, what you're doing, and very impressed, I want to say, with how your creativity and structured thinking really shine through with this mode and sort of topic that you're working in. I think it's really, really cool. And so I got into I got into sketchnoting because I had a problem with my neck that was causing me to have some cognitive issues, and mostly my language skills were the ones that were affected. So I could still think clearly, but I couldn't, always find words, and sometimes I'd find wrong words, and sometimes, it could be really funny at times, and sometimes I couldn't say words correctly. And so I wanted to kind of return to my background when I was younger, I studied art and I studied the ballet and I studied music. And so I wanted to return to those sort of more artistic and creative and um, sort of um, uh, right brain kind of um, areas of study to help me better express myself. Um, and so, I mean, that turned out to be, I don't know that I used it much besides just as experiments with my family. Um, but it turned out to be a really great way to pass the time until I got my neck fixed. So now I have my neck fixed, and I'm interested in um, working on, I don't know if I want to say a course, but thinking through some ways to teach civics to people using the new social media, um, and encouraging them to learn how to use information strategically and smartly, as well as to understand what their responsibilities as citizens of this country are. And so that's really returning to my background in history.
Great. Yeah, that's a great overview there. Uh, and riffing a little bit on just what you shared there, I feel like for many folks, often the gateway into sketchnoting is rooted in a childhood experience or interest in art or doodling. And I feel like the common experience for folks that had that interest growing up, there might have been some point in their schooling when it wasn't emphasized anymore, and the skills leaned far in the verbal direction as opposed to the visual direction. But then, at some point, coming across something they see online or something that someone tells them about, it's like, oh, they're the use of these visual tools is growing in awareness. So I think you're not alone in that part of your trajectory. And yeah, it's nice that it seems like you're now able to bring in some of your past experience, your background in history, and your current work in online education, to explore this important topic of teaching civics. And with that, social media lens is particularly interesting to me because I spend a lot of my time there, and I can see the challenges, but also the opportunities that live in that space.
For sure. And I want to say about that, one of the other things that really intrigued me about verbal to visual and about sketchnoting was that, economy of language or economy of getting across ideas is super important in
Mm,
the world that we live in now.
yes.
And so this really, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Amadeus, where the emperor says he doesn't like the symphony because it has too many notes. I
Mm,
always think of that like those of us who have background and strong verbal skills, we use too many words a lot of the
hmm,
time, and sketchnoting is a great way to just kind of refine our thinking,
mhm.
and then convey it across the media that are available to us now.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. So I've got pulled up a activity from early on within the course, an introduction to visual note taking, where you have kind of sketched out some goals that you'd like to work toward and the context in which you're working and the outcome you're shooting for. Do you want to kind of talk us through that document?
Yeah, so this is the first assignment in the verbal to visual course, and I had done it back in 2017, but with my new approach to it, I wanted to go back through these exercises again, and so um, this is the personal plan, part one, with the focus on goal, context, and outcome. And so for the goal, I think instead of actually stating it as a goal, I stated it as a topic,
Mhm.
and then focused on the sort of the outcomes down here under the outcome section. But I put digital civics, and the central theme being this is your government. Um, and then I thought, since I've had a little bit of practice sketchnoting, I thought I'd put something that made people think of digital things, and I just drew a little computer, which is a big part of my visual vocabulary. Um, so then in the next section, and this was actually super useful for me to think about. Well, I'm interested in rethinking how we teach civics, um, which I think many people will agree we may be able to do better than we're doing. But to whom? Who are we talking about? And so I first thought of social media. I mean, that's where so much kind of civic discourse goes
Mhm.
on these days. And so I wanted to make sure I put that as really kind of a broad context, even possibly the universe, for where something like this might go on. And then I thought about, who are we? What's the age group? What are the people that we're thinking about? And I wrote down K through 12, and then underneath it, I put schools. That should maybe be in parentheses, because that would be the traditional and alternative environment where a sort of sketchnoted plus digital civics type of learning um, situation might take place. So those were kind of the two, um, I guess, areas: schools and social media. And thinking about social media a little bit more, I mean, that would be a broader age group. And the other group within that occurred to me was people who are newly minted citizens,
Mhm.
or wanting to become newly minted citizens, um, might be interested in something like this. And so then I just put the internet, and sort of like, what is the action? Like, what are people doing where they would need to have some information on this? And one is people looking at information. We get lots of information these days. And historians will tell you too much information can be just as bad as too much information. That hardly ever happens to
Hmm.
historians, but I think it may in the future. It is hard to sort through what's really important. I mean, the historical method is to look at everything you can get your hands on. Um, Now, one of the most important skills that we need is being able to identify what is good information, what the actual source of it is, and what's useful for you, because you can't be a good citizen if you don't know how to do that. And then I put people making choices, and the choices I had in mind were, about who to vote for. Um, but I also think how you can contribute is another important piece of that. And so then the outcomes, I really tried to keep these sort of high level, but the outcomes would be to create a resource so that citizens know how to evaluate the sources of information that they're looking at on the internet, and citizens act on their civic responsibilities, which includes not just voting, but expressing their opinions, and not just tweeting, but even running for office. I don't think most people think of that as a responsibility, but it is one. Um, so that's what I put there.
That's great. I think that gives a great overview of I feel like both the yeah, landscape of the world in terms of how we each come across information connected to what's going on in our government. I think both like historically what's gone on in the past. So like how we got to where we are right now, and also what's going on right now in the um, options that are available to us as voters, and as active participants in both our kind of local and federal government. There is like, I'm especially this particular moment in time, like mid COVID, mid this explosion of awareness around Black Lives Matter, deciding like where to put our energies. And also like where to find good sources of information, reliable sources of information, incredibly important. Um, so this is all spot on. Uh, where let's see, I'm trying to think about where to go next or what to dig into. Is there a specific kind of challenge or sticking point or question at the forefront of your mind right now?
Well, I'm trying to remember what the next worksheet is on, but I will say that, the what I created here is pretty abstract and high level. So the obvious question to me that I think people would ask is like, what are you going to do with the sketches? What do you mean social media? How would you put this in a classroom? And um, so I guess that's kind of where I would go next.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah, I think that's a good area to focus on. Thinking about the way to apply the skill of sketchnoting, to the the practice of teaching these topics. Um, what does the current like uh, the learning environment that you're working in, what does that look like right now?
So the learning environment that I most recently was working in, because I'm not in one at the moment, it was one that we had access to a whiteboard and audio, and we weren't actually using um, the camera kind of as we're doing now. Um, but we weren't actually using the whiteboard as much as we could either. So that's kind of I picture this big blank whiteboard in my mind, and I think, what couldn't we put on that? When I say whiteboard, now let me explain that I'm talking about a digital whiteboard. It's one that you can write on in much the way that you're doing now,
Right.
and um, you can put printed text on it. You can also write in handwriting. You can draw on it. You can highlight. You can put arrows on it and things like that. Um, and I think we never really thought through that much what the possibilities were for this whiteboard, and so that's the obvious place to go with sketchnoting is on that whiteboard in a one to many synchronous, although it could also be recorded and be served up asynchronously. I'm talking online learning talk now. Um,
Right.
but
Well, and even for, uh, again, this moment in time for a certain amount of time from here on, like all classroom teachers are now having to deal with online teaching. So it's relevant.
what I'm interested in is marrying this to social media. So
Right.
I'm thinking of encouraging people to use social media, to use it critically, and to use it with visual representations of things. And so that's a little bit trickier, thinking about how to fold that in. And that may be something that I spin out in the network over the next couple of months.
Well, I see like there's almost I don't want to say an infinite number of directions to take this, but I see a whole lot of potential in this combination. Thinking particularly about an online learning experience, maybe having this digital whiteboard as a common reference point. And that could just be the form maybe of each lesson that occurs. And as you mentioned, some students maybe could attend that lesson live. Others might, watch a replay of it. And thinking about how to merge that with uh, social media. And I feel like with the social media piece, um, it's both a topic of the lesson, and it's also a place where um, activities and engagements and assignments can take place. Uh, what are you imagining the student experience to look like, specifically thinking about that combination of, um, you know, maybe attending a lesson within that whiteboard setting, but then the role that social media might play?
I mean, as you said, there are infinite possibilities. What I've seen happen, so the environment we're in right now, with the Mighty Networks, is
Hmm.
is an example of how you could, because the question is, how do you sort of aggregate your learners in an environment that's rich and dynamic enough to keep everybody engaged, and even if they can't all be in the same place at the same time. And so one possibility might be a platform like Mighty Networks. And then to get people involved in social media, there would be, assignments and a way to aggregate them, probably through hashtags. Um, Aggregate people's responses also in social media. I mean, I think what we have in Mighty Networks is also a social media, right? But
Right.
if people wanted to step out into the wide world, um, and Twitter is the one that is in my mind right now,
Hmm.
because it's the one that's been used so fruitfully recently
Right.
to draw people together. It's really shown an awesome potential for active civics to take place, and
Hmm.
I'm very excited about that. But then, so aggregating people with, like, say, a hashtag something unique, and then the assignments, I keep going back to the lesson that you have, Doug, where you talk about um, like index cards, like having a small, limited
Hmm.
space. And so with the index card idea, I'm thinking of something along the lines of assigning people to tweet and respond to each other using a sketch on an index card, because it sort of structures and limits, draws boundaries around um, the idea that they're trying to get across and the activity that they're doing. And then they get sort of this magical feedback from the other people, in the other learners in the course, or
Hmm.
anyone on Twitter who sees it, about how effective it is, and what people think of the ideas. So that's
Right.
kind of the best I have now. But
Yeah, well, there's an interesting parallel there between uh, the piece that you mentioned there, a constraint that I um, talk about fairly frequently, I think, and that I personally enjoy using, that of these 3x5 index cards, and like giving yourself this limitation of one idea per card, and trying to express an idea, with some combination of words and visuals on that card. And as you build those up, those could potentially become like the building blocks of a bigger set of ideas. There's an interesting parallel there to the constraints of Twitter, where you're limited to 200 and whatever characters it is. But you can kind of, I guess in Twitter's case, you can string together a thread of tweets, or, just look back at someone's profile to see what they've been sharing over time. So kind of like bringing those two together, uh, using Twitter, but then tweeting an image of an index card, like that becomes the the individual chunk that can then be worked with. I like that idea.
Well, it's neat because I hadn't thought about this before, but it's like the sketches, just like Twitter is a conversation, the sketches themselves become part of the conversation or even the conversation. So you're moving from just expressing ideas to exchanging ideas, which is, I hadn't thought about that, but
Yeah,
potentially be very interesting.
yeah, I like that. So if I remember correctly, too, one of the things we talked about early on, and maybe even before we started recording this conversation, is that part of the intention behind this conversation for you was some kind of clarity in the goal setting process early on, right? Because that's what we kind of where we started this conversation with the kind of first activity you shared from the intro course. I feel like it's been fun to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole of what the learning experience could look like, the way that you can tie in assignments and interactions with social media. Um, has that been helping to kind of create potentially a clearer goal?
It has. I mean, I can envision kind of where I'm going a lot more clearly. I also now feel like it's a lot of work, but fun work. So that's been super helpful. I mean, I think now what I'm going to need to do is to continue to refine, like what are the ideas within the course. What if I were to
Mhm.
take us like 12 index cards, what would be the picture for each sort of lesson, I guess, that that I would have um, on each of those 12 index cards. So that sounds like, I mean, to me, that's part of the goal setting and, drawing boundaries around. For me, that's the hardest part because
Mm.
I want to do all the things and tell all the things and draw all the things. Um, and so I think refining the goal will also take place as I continue to share my ideas and my direction with the network group.
Yeah. And do you have the topic of that course you mentioned in mind?
Digital civics, is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah. I
Like
guess
what would the
that's it. That
yeah,
makes sense.
digital civics and digital literacy? I mean, I see the two as being very tied together.
Yeah.
And I might come up with a better title, a catchier title at some point. But
No, I feel like merging those two together, I feel like makes so much sense. Uh, yeah, digital civics and digital literacy. Um, and yeah, that overlap that we've been talking about this combination of you mentioned how Mighty Networks is essentially a social media platform. And as I was kind of jotting down some ideas, I called it a closed social media because it is, it's not open to the entire world, which is where I think part of its power comes from. We've gathered together a group of people that are specifically working on building their sketchnoting skills, which makes it easier, I think, for individual participants to share some things and have conversations, knowing that it's a safe environment for that type of learning. But then pairing that with the open social media of Twitter, providing this other opportunity for students to share ideas in a more open way, that that combo feels so well suited for the topic of digital civics and digital literacy. Um, so I'm already getting excited for you about kind of the merging of those two. And yeah, I could see that the exercise of identifying the individual lesson ideas on index cards, being a good starting point. Um, and then I feel like some of what we've already started doing is like the other piece that might be fun to visualize as you're, you know, going through the course and working on your sketchnoting skills is kind of mapping out that interaction, um, or the your experience and the student experience in between those two environments of, whatever online learning environment um, you end up using when, sharing this course, but then also kind of the open social media that might go along with it. That could be another fun place to put your sketchnoting skills to use.
Yeah, so it's like it's an extension, I guess, of a digital community that's, the learning environment. It gets extended to Twitter or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, that's neat. I'm glad I thought of that while we were talking.
Yeah, no, I like the way you put that of just kind of identifying the bounds and the different areas of the learning environment. Like even just imagining that space. It's almost like picture some sort of a map where, certain things go on within this region, other things in that region, uh, that type of a big picture.
Absolutely, and I think too of the ability to move in and out of the bounded environment to the wide world, as I said earlier. People will learn um, the profound difference between um,
Hmm.
open social media, where anybody can see and comment and say anything they want to, and the more, I guess, curated space of an online classroom platform.
Yeah.
I think sometimes for some people that distinction isn't always clear, and I think that goes to some of the considerations around digital citizenship.
Yeah, it's true. The I feel like it's easy for lines to be blurred around. Uh, I guess I mean a lot of this comes down to like context, the context of a one-on-one conversation with someone versus a, classroom group discussion versus yeah, something that, you're sharing publicly out to the entire world. And even like, how easy it is uh to some degree, like lose your sense of humanity and like actual connection with other people when it's in an environment like Twitter where there's this distance between people and the ease of yeah, how easy it is to treat other people not like, yeah, inhumanely, or for arguments to go kind of it's easy for a whole lot of like unproductive conversations to take place on Twitter, but it's also a great place for important ideas to be spread. So kind of like finding that balance of how to interact with other people and um, share and consume information responsibly.
Absolutely, and I think we're finding here in the last just a couple of months, and especially a few weeks, how powerful that social sharing is. I mean, and how important it is to be responsible, and that goes to, I guess, my bottom outcome about people understanding their responsibilities as citizens.
Mm.
So it all fits together. This has been very useful.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I have enjoyed our conversation a lot as well. Um, Maybe as a way of kind of wrapping up our conversation with some specific follow up actions. I think you mentioned one of maybe using index cards to start to get down the individual ideas, the individual lessons that might go into this course. Is there anything else that you'd like to identify as a follow-up action that you might take after our combo?
I think that's probably the main one. The other thing I might do, and this is just because I'm trained as a project manager, is sort of sketch out the pieces of what it is that I need to plan to do in order to pull this together. Because I actually do have a real opportunity that someone brought to me yesterday to potentially teach a class in an
Nice.
online format. So I think maybe a timeline. And when I say sketch out, I mean actually even with the pictures
Yeah.
that I come up with. So yeah, sort of planning.
Right. I think that's a great idea, especially if you have a um, well-defined project in front of you, or even one that has a start date to it potentially. I feel like that's helpful to then, like, okay, here's where we are now. Here's the start date of this project. Let's kind of map out what the project development might look like.
Right, or when could the start date actually realistically be is another way that I'm thinking of it.
Helping to define, or yeah, decide when that could be, is a great piece as well.
Exactly.
Well, that's great that there's an opportunity in front of you. Are you able or willing to share a little bit about what that opportunity looks like?
To be honest with you, I don't know very much about it because, like I said, I just was sent the information yesterday. This is actually my oldest friend, one of my oldest friends. She and I've known each other since I think third grade. She and I connected up for a Zoom chat yesterday, and she mentioned that she's using this platform. And I should have, I can't remember the name of it either. I might text it to you when I get a look at it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's the only thing that she did say is that you develop your own class and you can
Mm,
teach as many sections and as many classes as you want to. And
nice.
so, and there's a like a profit sharing arrangement, and they do background checks, and so it's all pretty structured and all of that. And so I guess that's maybe another step, although it's not directly related to sketchnoting, but definitely to get a look at what that platform would be like because
Mm,
it does relate to this project.
right.
So
Yeah, and I think that that's another thing that's getting more attention in these times. The variety of online learning platforms that exist, right? Like we mentioned, Mighty Networks as one of the many uh, that exist, kind of along the whole spectrum of like um, adult learning, for folks that are, doing their own professional development, and, you know, people like me who are, creating and charging money for courses. And like, there's that whole end of it. But then on the other side, there's the Google Classroom side of it, K through 12 and university teachers who are building online classrooms in that environment. So, no shortage of those type of platforms to explore. But it's good that it sounds like this opportunity is connected to one in particular, which is nice because you can just go look at what that one looks like.
yeah, it is, and I think there may be some comparisons to Mighty Networks, which I'll probably look at too. I sort of found myself having a host account in my other email, so I think which is connected to where I went to graduate school.
Mm,
I think I may have already have a host account set up. I have to take a look and see what that's about. I'm very excited. This is neat because, yeah, coming out of sort of the health crisis, you're always a little unsure what direction you're going next.
mm.
And wow, I feel like I have direction too. So this is awesome.
Well, that's great. I'm very excited about the direction that you're headed. As we've talked about, very important topics that we all as adult citizens could spend some more time with. Um, but then also sharing this for anyone coming up through the school systems at any age would benefit from these ideas. So do stay in touch as you keep working on these, because I want to see what you end up making. And yeah, glad we can keep sharing things within our mighty network. Anything else you'd like to share before we hop off our call for today?
No, I think that's all. I just want to know, will I be able to see when will I be able to see what you were working on while we were?
Yeah. So I've been capturing our conversation live using the app Concepts on my iPad. And my plan, so this is only the second time I've done this while recording a podcast conversation, but my plan is to share the screen recording of what I've been doing when I publish this podcast episode, which will be, I think we're about 3 weeks or so out, 3 to 4 weeks from publish time when we're having this conversation. But when I publish it, I will publish it to the normal kind of podcasting platforms, but then also to the new YouTube channel that I set up just for this podcast. So I will be sure to let you know about that, Krissa, so you can go in and watch. Um, and also for listeners who want to see uh, a little bit of a visual capture, a mind map of sorts that tracks kind of where we went in our conversation today. Uh,
Yeah, I'm excited to see that.
yeah.
I feel famous.
Oh, you are. You have no idea how many people you have probably helped, and I'm just thinking about all the different educators and online creators who are wanting to also make their own educational materials and share them online. I'm sure it sparked a lot of ideas for them. So
Good, I hope so. It's an exciting time to be doing this.
yeah, I agree. Well, Krissa, thank you so much for
Thanks, Doug.
taking the time.
I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that chat between Krissa and I, and maybe that it sparked some specific ideas for you about blending a closed online learning environment and an open one. And maybe even deeper than that, I hope that it helped you to maybe clarify your own goals and intentions behind your sketchnoting skill development. If you would like to check out Verbal to Visual's semi-public learning environment and maybe enroll in the same course that Krissa is taking, an introduction to visual note-taking, you can find that at verbaltovisual.com. And as always, keep in mind that after picking up one of our sketchnoting courses or joining the Verbal to Visual community, you'll get access to these one-on-one coaching calls for free. And finally, as I mentioned at the beginning here, if you've been enjoying these conversations, I would really appreciate you leaving a rating and review on whatever app you use to listen to this show. If you haven't already done that, here's your chance. And with that, we will wrap it up for this week. I look forward to bringing another conversation your way next week. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Till next time.